In the 2 decades of the 50s and 60s, Chicago built 18,000 public housing units. But where were they built? They were built almost exclusively in black neighborhoods.
The clearest example of that was, of course, the several developments that were built between the Dan Ryan and State Street on this little strip of land going for a couple of miles.
Public housing developments were in large part constructed in parts of the city that were redlined. And residents were assigned to public housing buildings in Chicago based on their race. These were intentional decisions that removed options for black residents of this city about where to live.
They were very isolated. Buildings were not kept in good repair. The residents didn't have access to, opportunities, services, good schools.
Community members and residents saw what was happening, and they objected to it. And they explained that those decisions were reinforcing already existing patterns of redlining and existing patterns of discrimination.
And so it was so important to have a voice who was able to go to court and have a court order and really bring the Chicago Housing Authority to the table and demand rights on behalf of the residents.
In August of 1966, we filed the case. And then it took several years until 1969 when liability was established.
The decision in Gautreaux in 1969 essentially said that this very dense concentration of poverty in public housing, almost entirely populated by blacks, violated the civil rights of the residents of public housing.
And then the case entered the remedies phase, and which was, okay, this problem is here. What do we do about it?
The first thing the judge said that CHA and HED were going to have to do was stop building concentrated public housing in these dense, segregated areas. You're going to have to start desegregating. You're going to have to start putting public housing in more diverse neighborhoods, in white communities.
The problem with that was that the city council had the ability to block further development.
Guess what? No alderman wanted to see public housing start to get built in non-segregated communities, and so nothing really happened for a long time.
The city council's refusal to allow developments to move forward was not happening in a vacuum. These decisions were being made in the context of a history of racial segregation continuing to this day in this city.
That case was decided ultimately by the Supreme Court of the United States. Alex Polikoff was the lead attorney representing the plaintiffs. He won unanimously.
It was a really significant decision. And what it did was then HUD settled the case, and they created the second major remedy stream, which was a completely brand new idea, an innovative program that was called the Gautreaux Assisted Housing Program.
Gautreaux families were given vouchers that would subsidize their rent at the same level public housing families' rent was subsidized. And they could use these vouchers to rent in the private market anywhere in the 6-county metropolitan area as a result of that Supreme Court decision. Lots of good things were happening to families, things like more income, better jobs, better school experiences for their kids, and so on.
By the time that program ended, families had moved to over 100 different suburbs, all through this Gautreaux program.
The voucher program was all good and nice, but you needed to start building public housing in other areas. And the CHA proved pretty incapable of doing that.
CHA was recalcitrant and incompetent, and the building program didn't go forward. We eventually had to get a receiver appointed.
The receiver steps into the shoes of the Public Housing Authority, so we were responsible for all of the family, non-elderly redevelopment of public housing.
Eventually, about 2,000 scattered site units were built, but that was a drop in the bucket compared to the 40,000 families who were members of the plaintiff class. So the third stream of relief was called mixed income housing.
Our principal responsibilities were these large redevelopments. And so we work very closely with the resident-led organizations to hire the architects and the construction folks and assemble the team, but really importantly, develop what the plan for the redevelopment was, which was very community resident driven.
That then led to the plan for transformation, which was a broad plan to replace a substantial number of the traditional public housing developments in Chicago with mixed income communities.
We have places where new communities that include public housing, but also include middle income housing and even some affluent housing, for sale housing, as well as rental housing.
Impact for Equity, known for part of this lawsuit as BPI, has been working for more than 50 years as a zealous advocate for residents, fighting with residents and for residents to ensure that their housing choices were truly a choice. In 2019, on behalf of the residents, we worked to negotiate a settlement agreement with the Chicago Housing Authority. The goal of that settlement agreement was to create a path to achieving finally remedy for residents and ending the litigation once and for all.
The 5-year settlement agreement came to an end in 2024, but several of the commitments that CHA had made in that settlement agreement had not been accomplished. And so Impact for Equity and CHA negotiated an amendment to the agreement that extends it for up to 3 years and really focuses on 6 public housing sites.
Impact for Equity has still remained a vital part of the work of the plan for transformation. Making sure that the housing is supposed to be built gets built, but how do we also help ensure that those really vital community services that everybody wants, the good schools, the transportation, access to child care, educational opportunities, are also a part of the ongoing work of the plan for transformation. And Impact for Equity is still very much a part of all of that work.
What Gautreaux is fundamentally about is justice. Justice for public housing residents and their families who have waited for decades to have true choice about where they live and where they raise their families in the city of Chicago.